You may not have heard of this, but a genuinely controversial story is going down right now, and it impacts the stores that all of us use. So, a critically acclaimed indie developer can't release their latest artsy horror game on either the Steam or Epic Game stores this week. It will be on GOG, it will be on Humble, but Valve said no to the developer 2 years ago. That was based on an entirely different build of the game than the one that will be launching on those stores. And what this means is that about 75% or more of the PC gaming audience won't be able to see this game. Now, publishers actually stepped in to try and leverage their own contacts to help the developer. They tried to talk to Valve, but they came back with a fairly simple response. Quote, "No, you're fucked. Bye." And they meant that. Without Steam and its audience, this studio, Santa Ragione, actually expects to shut down after this game releases. And it's all because a content reviewer has a different interpretation than the developer. Santa Ragione have released 6 games across more than a decade, and now they're not sure if they'll see another decade. And these are critically acclaimed games that don't sell blockbuster numbers, but are sustainably made. And if you think of video games as a true art form, then these are the people who are out there to push the boundaries. You know, like indie art movies. Maybe you don't see them, but they're often instrumental in driving the culture forward. Now, this studio works with creatives to bring a single game to life, often exploring an esoteric idea, almost like an art film. And that is why this game, Horses, is a bit weird. It's a first-person narrative horror game with FMV sequences that are set on a farm where the titular animals are, in fact, nude people wearing horse head masks. Now, to be clear, this is a game designed to make you feel uncomfortable. Lots of amazing art does that, but according to the developers, Valve and Epic don't think you should be playing horses, and because of their decisions, the studio will likely have to shutter. Now, given what we've covered today, I don't think you'll be surprised to find out that I use Neigh. They are both today's sponsor and the easiest way for you to fight back. You see, whenever data leaks, data brokers harvest it up and sell it on. Ever wonder how spam callers actually get your number? It's often that, and Neigh solves this problem by automating all of the legal paperwork you would otherwise have to do. And if you join at incogni.com/Bellular News, you get 60% off the annual plan. Now here's how it works. You enter your information. That's it. It now works. It really feels like magic. You see, you've got a legal right to get your data taken down, but doing so means paperwork, that takes hours, and it's not permanent. It can just be slurped up again. Neigh automatically scans brokers, it sends takedown requests, and it adds you to suppression lists, all automatically, and they continually rescan to keep your data down. Just take a look at my dashboard. 214 sent, 1 in progress, 213 completed, and I'm on 26 suppression lists, which really does give me peace of mind. And over at incogni.com/Bellular News, you can get that peace of mind as well as 60% off an annual plan. So check them out today using my link. We need to begin with Valve's initial decision. So they made their decision on Horses 2 years ago. That was long before Visa and MasterCard changed Steam's policy on mature games. Santa Ragione submitted the game's Steam page in 2023, just before they would showcase it via mainstream platforms like the Jeff Keighley-backed Day of the Devs. So it's not a game so far out there that mainstream marketing platforms and people like Jeff Keighley would not be involved. Now, for this game, the review process took longer than normal. The devs say that Steam asked for a review build before they would let the page go live. This is unusual, but it's not unheard of for games that are tagged as containing mature content. Remember, in this case, that is nude people in horse masks. So in response to this, the devs, quote, scrambled together a build that could be played start to finish solely to satisfy Steam's requirements. They told Valve they would change anything that would be, quote, considered problematic. Essentially, they know that they're pushing boundaries, and besides, they weren't done making the game. It wasn't a finished thing that was ironclad, and they specifically said to Valve, if you have a problem with something, please tell us. Evidently, they want to play by the rules, they want to be on Steam. Valve's response to all this was, however, clear. They sent them a link to the onboarding policies of Steam, and they told the studio that they would not allow the game on Steam. Ever. But more than that, that no resubmissions would be allowed, even with modifications. And that meant that the door was closed before they could even offer to change anything. I'll now go to a quote. "We found that this title features themes, imagery, or descriptions that we won't distribute. Regardless of developers' intentions with their product, we will not distribute content that appears, in our judgment, to depict sexual content involving a minor." Yeah, when I told you this one would be controversial, I wasn't lying. That wasn't just hyping up the video. But that being said, there is a lot of nuance to negotiate, because other people very much do not agree with Valve. Let's negotiate some art. Now, from that statement alone, it is hard to disagree with Valve. Almost impossible to disagree with Valve. If that's in your game, they are well within their rights to say no. Yeah, they are, and I would back them in that. Now, there is a line, though, that's at the core of this story, and that line is, "in our judgment." You see, Santa Ragione say that what Valve saw was not in their game back then, and is definitely not in their game now, which does make this whole thing a bit weird, doesn't it? They're flat out saying that Valve are basically wrong, that they've misfired. And what made this difficult is that they can't even know for certain what Valve was even talking about. Valve never flagged which part of their game was at fault. They were basically told they crossed a line, but they weren't told where that line was. And when they look at Valve's statement, they do not see that as actually being reflective of their game. Now, the devs don't think it's the real humans present in the FMV sequences, despite an informal statement from a reviewer suggesting that those take longer to review. Now, we know FMV has been fine in the past with games like Immortality, but not in games like Vile Exhumed, which Valve also banned. Now, Santa Ragione think it is a scene from that build where, quote, "a man and his young daughter visited the farm." In that scene, the kid rides on the shoulder of the horses as the player walks around. And here's what the studio had to say for themselves. Quote, "The scene is not sexual in any way, but it is possible that the juxtaposition is what triggered the flag." So from their perspective, it was a difference in interpretation. As they put it, quote, "the intent is never to arouse. It uses challenging, unconventional material to encourage discussion." Essentially, they saw themselves as being in the same space as Shower with Your Dad Simulator. That is a game that Steam has hosted for more than a decade. But as they said, they were in fact open to changing the game to meet Valve standards. I think that's one of the more clear things here. Remember, whenever they did that initial submission, they overtly told Valve, if there is anything that's a problem, tell us and we can change it. Because back at that stage, they hadn't completed the game yet. And since that period of time, the game has actually changed substantially. They took people's feedback and they reworked everything. Everyone in the game is now, quote, "clearly older than 20 years old." And they suggest that it's a better game for it as well, because the dialogue delivered actually feels more real. Whatever else, that means the content Valve objected to can't be in the game. It does not exist anymore, yet Steam still won't allow it. And, as we recently found out, the Epic Games Store won't allow it either. They dropped their news only 24 hours before the game's launch, after Epic had actually been reviewing it for 2 months, and with approvals given for the likes of the game's achievements only weeks ago. It's hard to tell why this happened, but perhaps somebody caught sight of the press around Steam's decision. What we know is they told Santa Ragione that because the game featured frequent or unlabeled explicit content and, quote, "animal abuse," that they would not let the game on their store. And like with Steam, their rejection did not explain what needed to be changed in order to fit in the store. They just suggested that horses had an adults-only rating by their own calculation, which means that they could not carry it. Now, that would also mean that most American retailers wouldn't carry it because Epic, like them, won't carry AO-rated games. Though I do need to add Epic's rather fun little exclusion. There is a few categories of adults-only games that they'll allow in their store. And those are blockchain and NFT ones. So, yeah. All good with Mr. Sweeney. As for the studio, Santa Ragione, they are now again confused by this interpretation. That's because their own submission to the same ratings board left the game with a M for mature rating, and they think that their pixelated mature content is entirely reasonable for that rating, and that the entire point of the game is that abuse of any kind is bad. But in spite of that, Epic denied their appeal and they won't carry the game. And Epic never would have been the same market as Steam could have provided, right? There's just not as many people on the Epic Game Store, but at least it would have been something. Now, the devs still do have something left, because other stores will carry the game. GOG and Humble are those, and the devs even say that console makers have claimed they would be, quote, happy to have the game on their platform. And when I think about big console makers, I think about humongous corporations who are usually terrified by risk. So if people in those companies' review teams think that they would be able to carry this game, it certainly raises your eyebrow with Epic and Steam, especially if you take a look at what Steam is willing to publish, which, can be pretty damn spicy. The devs even reached out to industry contacts, even inside Valve, and when they did, publishers offered to help. But after those publishers talked to Valve, they came back with a fairly simple response. And you've heard it already in this video. No, you're fucked. Bye. After this broke, Valve went to the press, and they say that their internal content review team, quote, discussed the decision extensively after the studio asked, and still decided to say no, and the no modified version of the game would be allowed. Now, Valve are, of course, within their right to deny service. No one is obligated to a position in Steam. But here's the thing. If the standards to access that platform are not explicit, and the decision is unappealable based on the opinions of an unaccountable review team, then any game could be denied for any reason. And that, personally, is where I start to take severe issue with how Valve have decided to run this. Now, sometimes these decisions get reverted, right? Maybe with a different reviewer, but clearly not this time. Now, Horses was of course never a game about making massive profits. I don't think it would ever be that type of game. No, it's a game that's about making art and surviving. And that means that losing the platform that represents 75% of the gaming audience basically is a death sentence. Margins are already razor thin in this type of game. And this is especially the case given another change that Valve made around the same time. It's an equally ill-defined one, and it's one that may seal Santa Ragione's fate. So that we're on the same page, you need to understand that for small indie narrative games, they can't really drop big patches or DLC. That is just often not financially viable given the margins that you realistically get in that sphere of gaming on Steam. So that means that the tools many of them use to get long tail sales are basically sales and then being in bundles. Bundles with other games that would share a similar core audience. So because of this, Santa Ragione planned to use bundles to drive sales of their previously poorly selling game, Saturnalia. But to get in those bundles, you usually need Steam keys. And in 2023, right when Horses was denied, Valve changed the rules and then applied them retroactively to all games on Steam. It was a new discretionary policy that meant Valve can actually stop you from generating Steam keys for off-platform sales if you don't meet an undefined sales target. And there's the phrase again, discretionary. In their judgment, you can still bundle on Steam, but they won't let you go on the likes of Humble with their keys. And of course, the likes of Humble is exactly where this studio needed to be. And here's where they were left. After investing €50,000 of their own money, they could not drive sales to earn any more money. They couldn't get a publisher to back them without being able to do a Steam launch. Because of course, for a publisher, backing a game that's got zero hope of getting on Steam ever is unfeasible. But the developers still wanted to make their game. So to do that, they took another €50,000 in loans to finish it off, quite simply because they actually believed in it. They believed in the game. But what that means is that they're $100,000 in the hole on a game that 3/4 of the audience will never see. Without Steam, they don't expect to recoup their development costs. They're using the last bits of funding they've got to fix bugs and to add quality of life features. And after that, well, they're being realistic with themselves. And that means they are preparing to shut down operations. We're left in a rough position then, because while Epic may have also denied Horses a spot in their store, what they're doing is building on a decision, and I would say objectively bad practices that were actually on Valve. Now, I'm not asking you to buy this game, to like this game, or anything like that. My main point with this video is the process. if the likes of Valve are making decisions like this that basically do end up being a kingmaker that will make or break a studio, then I think a studio does deserve some transparency. And Valve acting like this and not explaining themselves properly, that actually does add a lot of confusion into the market. Because apparently whatever type of porn slop you can think of, regardless of how, let's just say, morally palatable it may be, if that can pretty much always get on Steam, but art can't, well, that's going to have a bit of a chilling effect. That will make some artists think twice about the types of work they'll embark on. And the common theme here are the discretionary practices. It's that phrase, in our judgment, from Valve's review. They have these policies that are open to interpretation with no clear standards. It's all just vibes. The review team reviewed their decision and upheld it, but did not explain why. And if the moderators of the biggest platform in gaming decide that your game doesn't count, then players will not see it. Again, adult games, incredibly violent games can be on Steam, but a game that's just making people feel uncomfortable, like so many legendary books, television shows, and films have before, apparently that's too far. And that's mainly what Santa Ragione are calling out here. I'll quote them. "This double standard suggests Steam does not treat games as art, on par with film, and intervenes with censorship when an artistic vision does not align with what the platform owner considers acceptable art." I mean, hey, maybe is this just a thing where you could perhaps say European attitudes and standards towards art can vary from American ones, where as much as whenever I think of America, I think of a screaming freedom eagle, it's not always like that for art, is it? Europe does tend to be more liberal for artistic expression in some things like this on a cultural basis, but I'm not going to get bogged down in that fully. I just wonder if there is a little bit of a culture shock dimension to this story. Of course, if I'm completely off base, that's also totally fine as well, and you can tell me that's what you think. I do actually want to listen. But for the most part, when I look at the rules in Steam, most of them seem to exist to stop grifters filling Steam with illegal or deliberately inflammatory content. I don't think any of us want Steam to be flooded with that, but in this case, Santa Ragione are an established and well-regarded studio that make well-reviewed artistic works. This is the kind of weird, sometimes off-putting work that exists in mature and sometimes even immature art forms. And Valve doesn't think it belongs on the biggest platform in PC gaming based on a decision that they made 2 years ago when they were looking at an entirely different game, and they have refused to give any transparency or any guidance to the development community on what actually went wrong here. That is not right. And now, of course, the studio is left hoping that they can somehow sell enough copies on other platforms to survive. And some of those other platforms are, of course, doing the smart thing. Never waste a crisis, right? The likes of GOG are saying, hey, this is valid art. We will sell it on our storefront. This is what makes us different. A fairly obvious way to get some self-promo out of this issue. And that is the reality for a studio whose only crime, it seems, was making art that made someone at Valve feel uncomfortable. To which I'll say, art is important, boo-hoo about your goddamn feelings, Valve. Actually, man up and be transparent. Goddamn explain yourself. Because if you can't explain yourselves, then maybe you should be questioning this decision. That's it for me. I would love to hear your thoughts on this. And for a dramatic, but thankfully less uncomfortable story, you can watch this video next.